Okay, we have now looked at a few examples within popular methodology of foreign language teaching. We've looked at grammar translation, where we went with translation as the the only tool. We've looked at the direct method, where everything takes place in the foreign language. So you have a foreign language classroom language, so you use that language all the time. We looked a little at audiolingualism, which is a special approach to this method, was then morphed into in the United States. We also looked at PPP, presentation, practice, production, and we looked at ESA, engage, study, activate. And now we turn to 4 methods, not all of which may be really efficient, but they have been popular and perhaps they can still inspire teaching. One such method is the community language learning, with there being a knower or teacher that would stand outside a circle of students communicating. The students will then, form their own community and learn the language, as you might say, the natural way, and just there would be might be completely adidactic without. I don't know what the educational intentions are, but it's really for the students to, find a topic, talk about that, and you're only there to help out. It takes an enormously capable teacher to do this. You really you would nearly have to be completely fluent in the foreign language in question, and many a teacher has in fact burnt their fingers, perhaps even crashed and burnt using this method. But perhaps it could be turned into some kind of task-based learning alternative which is more viable. More about that later. Okay, Suggested-pedia is also, at least in its very classical, very original form, a rather strange format for teaching foreign languages. Here you like to be suggestive. We like, in a way, to use hypnosis and teaching together. We want to use hypnotic teaching, you might say. It's all about lowering the affective filter, and students will then sit in reclining chair and listen to the teacher reciting a poem. There being subdued soft classical music in the background. Like, you can imagine the whole setting, could you not, with flaring candlelights and so on and so forth. So what you maximize here is ambience. It's so pleasant to be here, but it is as though this mere lowering of the affective filter, this mere pleasant ambience, will then translate into something like a hypodermic needle that you press into the students. Then if they just relax enough, then they'll have complete intake out of the input. Is it brainwashing? Is it suggestive? What is it? But we know that there are rather beautiful experiences using subdued classical music teaching mouth. So of course the ambience bit is something that you might still exploit in your teaching methodologies, part of your repertoire. Right, but going the whole hog might be a bit of an odyssey, perhaps even a rather mistaken journey. Okay. Total physical response, very useful with beginners. Teaching here is also very teacher controlled, and the students will then show that they understand the language by listening to it and carry out orders. You could do it like with a simple game, heads and shoulders, knees and toes, sort of. And you could also turn it into a sort of output thing with the students then doing the game afterwards. Another example could be playing Simon Says, where the teacher would then tell the students, okay, Simon says, go to the window. And the students will have to go to the window. In the beginning, he might show them how to go to the window, so forth, but then after a while, he'll just, after the demonstration, let the students do it on their own, and ultimately could change this and translate this into an exercise that is then run by students in individual groups, and then of course you can use TPR in rather total physical response in a rather meaningful way. The silent way is not really useful. It's not here the students would really work completely on their own. If we think about CLL, the communicative language learning example that we had as the first example of the 4 methods, here the teacher could still, be a consultant to help out students and be a prompter. So with the silent way, he's reduced to someone to just point at a phonemic chart or point at a poster with a useful phrase on it. So the teacher is completely silently non-involved. On we go. Hope you're ready for a little more. So we go to the next slide. CLT is what we basically believe in today. We like language to be taught in a communicatively authentic way, but we also want, as it was not perhaps the case when it was introduced, for CLT to be to feature also grammar and language focus. In the olden days, when it really began, it was a sort of anti-grammar approach where people thought that students should just learn language in the trenches. So we just have to create a communicative environment and meaningful tasks, authentic meaningful tasks for them to carry out on their own, and then language learning would more or less take place by itself. There should be an authentic communicative purpose for the teaching to be meaningful and easily practicable, of course, also outside the classroom. And one example of CLT used in CLT could be a gap task, information gap task, for instance, as an exercise that I've tried out with you, or not with you, you've been one of my students, with a tourist calling a tourist agency to plan a trip to York, and then one student will be the tourist and will have the map, and at the tourist agency, for some very strange reason, they don't have a map, and it's for the student to ask for information to find out at which times he can visit this or that resort that he or she wants to visit, and the tourist agency will then have to fill in the information. Nice and authentic communicative task. In the olden days, people thought they could just learn things communicating. Today, we would like to sort of scaffold that process, give the students, useful chunks and phrases, help them, prompt them also, and so as to prevent communication breakdowns. And it would also, we'll do it with introducing language teaching as well, having language focus. Says students would work on the task, or perhaps even teach grammar in the foreign language using a direct method here, and then the grammar exercise would be also something to be carried out in English. So grammar also being part of it. This is the way that we like CLT to be practiced today. We know that grammar does not really is not something that's just learnt by itself. All learning does not automatically take place by itself. Right. TBL then, he would have a pre-task phase, the task cycle with the task, the planning and the reporting phase, and the post-task phase with the language focus, analysis and practice phases. The pre-task phase, here you demonstrate the task for the students. You might use a recording to show them how other students did that, or you might use 2 students to demonstrate what the task is, or you might demonstrate what the task itself, and you'll play the task, show them what it's all about. There will be lots of scaffolding. You might use, posters with useful phrases and chunks on the blackboard, and so on and so forth. You discuss the topic with the students so that you get them into it. That would be the pre-task phase. Then there's the task phase, the task cycle, and here there are 3 phases actually. There is, or 3 stages. Sorry, there's one phase with 3 stages in it. One is the task itself. They carry out the task, and then they plan. And what is that planning? Well, they jot down notes on how to report on the task. Here they'll report what they learned from it, what problems they encountered, and how they got over the problems. Okay. In the post-task phase, the students, the teacher's role while in the task cycle is there to monitor at a distance, take notes, and so on and so forth, so that, and also building on the reporting phase and so forth, plan meaningful language-focused topics on the basis of that which was communicated, so that we'll work with zone and proximal development. So we'll have the language focus address problems that naturally turned up while at the task. Okay. So, and then the teacher might design a little practice exercise, a little drill, and so on and so forth. So we work here from authentic communication to the students' work of doing authentic communication, and we find out what their problems are, and then we address the problems as they emerge naturally. A problem about this is that it will not be all problems that would just naturally emerge while in the trenches while doing a task. So sometimes we'll have to take up matters that do not really, there would be language focused items to address that would not just rear their ugly faces, as it were, in a communicative task. You might have to teach things, and what you can do here is, of course, to do your grammar teaching using a task-based learning format. Okay, moving on. You're game for a little more. So, here we go. The lexical approach is very chunks-based. We like to work with the individual words and what they combine with. And here the teacher might use modifier, insertion, scrambled expressions, or sort of, scrambled idioms, scrambled chunks. The student will then have to put these idioms together. A lexical approach might be useful, but the problem is that we would like them to use these chunks to a meaningful end, rather than just let them work with it. But the beauty of it is that you can then work with individual words and what they combine with. Of course, that will help the students acquire vocabulary, and that would also help them form networks in their brain, so that they're not just taught the words themselves, they're also taught the idioms that they are part of, the chunks, the lexicalized phrases, and so on and so forth. So here you work with vocabulary in a rather meaningful way, but of course we like this to be combined with some kind of authentic communicative teaching. So a lexical approach based sequence could easily take place, for instance, in TBL, which is saw before. You could be part of the pre-task phase, where they'll work with these with the modifiers, such as scrambled expressions, and so forth, to do with the task at hand. Okay, they can also, of course, use that as part of the task phase, the task cycle. Sorry, in TBL. Moving on. So, what methodology to pick? There are criticisms that we find with the direct method, namely so-called native speakerism. Because if you just do the direct method, then you could teach English anywhere, couldn't you? As long as you're a native speaker. The problem is that perhaps it's not a good idea, because you wouldn't know what unless you've studied the non-native speakers, the non-native students' language. Unless you study that, you would not really have an idea what their problems are. And of course, there's the further problem is that culture and teaching go together. And if we do L2 only, then we could argue that the students are in fact reduced in their means of expression. That is, so if there's something pressing that really urgent for them to express, they can't express in the second language, then of course one would now and then allow, as a last resort and as an exception, of course, as the exception, for the students to use their mother tongue. But we'll try gently to have all classes completely taught in English, because we like them to have the input, right? Students need input for that to have an output, and they need interaction to practice. So we need input, output, and interaction for a method to be fruitful. And I think this is perhaps the central points to be made here. Thanks for now.